Hi everyone, welcome to Techrides. I'm Edwin Marcial, and today I'm really excited to be with Ed Bolian. Ed is the founder and CEO of the VINwiki app, which also has an impressive YouTube following of 800,000 subscribers and growing fast every day.
Yep.
And Ed is also famously known for setting the world record in the Cannonball Run, and he did that in 2013.
That's right.
Ed, welcome to Techrides.
Thanks for having me.
Really great. I'm really excited to talk. I know you've got so many stories and there's so many things that I want to ask you about. But the first thing I want to talk about today is the Cannonball Run. And it's just such an incredible story to me. And you've got the CL55 that you set the record in, right?
I do.
You do, right? So let's go take a look at it and talk about it some more.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So let's talk about the Cannonball Run, because it's a race from New York City to Los Angeles, right?
Exactly. The Red Ball Garage in Manhattan, where they used to store the car and driver test fleet, all the way to the Portofino Hotel and Marina in Redondo Beach.
Okay. And what part of New York City is that exactly?
It's on East 31st Street.
Okay. And you did this record in 28 hours and 50 minutes.
That's right. Yeah.
That is completely mind-boggling to me. And you got no speeding tickets or traffic tickets, and I can't even get out of my neighborhood without getting a ticket. So it's incredible to me. But did you always want to do this? When did you get this idea to run this race?
You know, I was used to seeing these magazine articles of Nürburgring times and 0 to 60 runs and quarter-mile times and things like that, but I was always fascinated about what a car could do on the road. And I was talking to my dad about how cool it'd be if they had great cars with great drivers that just lined up on one coast and raced to the other. And he's like, oh yeah, Cannonball, they did that before you were born. That sounds like you. And so I started doing all the research and checking out, who had done it and what the stories were and things like that, but they'd stopped it. Cannonball ran from 1971 to 79, and there was a continuation event, the U.S. Express, from 81 to 83, but nobody else was really doing it at that point. So I'm a high schooler just enamored with this idea of this great American road trip and thinking, how do I attach my identity, myself, to this amazing idea that just compelled me?
Right, that's pretty cool. And then when you finally got decided you were going to do it,
yep.
There was a lot of planning you took in, right, to just get ready to do the race, right?
For sure. So when this kind of interest was sparked, 2003 or so, I'm in high school, and I actually did a project where I had to interview someone in a career that I might want to pursue, and I thought maybe I want to be an automotive journalist. And so I actually interviewed Brock Yates, who was the founder of the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash. The lady at the front desk at Car and Driver magazine gave me his home phone number, and so I called him and we talked, and I told him one day I wanted to see if I could do it any faster than they did. And he'd written a book in 2001 that said that the wall was really 30 hours. Like, that could not be beaten. And that was the popular thought, was that with as many cops, as many cars and everything as there were on the road, even though the roads had improved a little bit since 1979, that was as fast as anybody could go.
And the previous record was like 30 hours?
31 hours and 4 minutes. So we beat a record that was set by Alex Roy and Dave Maher in 2006 in a BMW M5. And they did it in 31 hours and 4 minutes, which is like a 91.5 mile an hour average. And our moving average was 100.3 miles an hour. And with 46 minutes stopped, our overall average was 98.
Wow, incredible. So tell me about, you had a lot of technology in the car, right? In this car right here.
A good
and
bit.
I can see it right here, all the screens and stuff. Tell me about what you did to the car to get it ready to run.
Right, so once this idea was born, I spent about the next decade just trying to formulate the best strategy to have a chance to set the record. And fortunately, in that amount of time, we had the record set twice. So Richard Rawlings and Dennis Collins of Gas Monkey Garage and Alex Roy and Dave Maher both set times. And so I kind of got to see what it looked like in a modern context, and I had something to build from. And so in this car, we've got 3 radar detectors, 2 laser jamming systems, a CB radio, a police scanner, an ambulance traffic light changer, 3 GPS systems, all sorts of different things that we wanted to use to make sure that we were as undetectable to the cops as we possibly could be. We've got multiple timers to verify everything, third-party GPS tracking devices, antennas, and we also wanted to make sure we could go a little bit further. So we added 2 additional 22-gallon fuel cells in the trunk, and we kept the factory 23-gallon tank in place. We had 67 gallons, and we could go about 850 miles at speed.
Wow, so you really thought this through for a long time.
Yes, it was a bit of an obsession for a very long time in my life.
And had you done any practice runs?
Well, I had done rallies and things like that, and those were a lot of fun. I still do those from time to time, but it's not the same as really being out there and saying, I'm not going to stop for anything other than gas. And so Really, when we did it in 2013, I honestly thought it was just going to be kind of a shakedown run where we would see how fast we could go and then figure out what we've got to fix in order to have a shot at actually setting the record. But in fact, everything that we really couldn't control, the traffic, construction, accidents, police patrolling, weather, everything just went perfectly. It was kind of like arriving in Manhattan and you're in a suitable car with a good team, but really you just get the chance to pull the arm on some mythical slot machine and each wheel reveals the outcome of a different variable. And for us, it was all sevens and no one had ever seen a circumstance like that.
Right, right. So you mentioned some of the tech and this one really jumped out at me, the ambulance, the traffic light changer.
Yeah, so there's a button in there that on some non-encrypted traffic lights, you press it and it will either turn them all red or just yours green. They program them in different ways. And it's also called a MERT, or there was a brand name in the 90s called an Omnitron that obviously the company was very quickly told to stop selling. But yeah, they sell them to ambulances. It might not be the most legal or upstanding thing to press the button on, but you know, when you got to go, you got to go.
Did you use it?
It only worked in California. I mean, obviously you kind of design the route to maximize your time on the highways. You don't want to get bogged down on surface streets and things like that. And so we only used it a couple times in California.
Right, right. So the additional fuel was probably a huge difference maker, right? Just not having to stop as much.
Exactly.
What other tech really helped you out?
Well, with the fuel, you know, the risk is you're talking about 400 pounds of fuel that you're going to be burning through. And so I needed enough suspension to make that work. And so I was kind of, I guess, up against a 400 horsepower E39 M5, which is a very formidable high-speed cruising car. And so this car with its supercharged V8 has 493 horsepower, but it's also got an active body control suspension, as Mercedes calls it. And so that levels the car several times per second. So as we burn through the weight of the fuel that was far beyond what the car would have anticipated, it kept the car level and it handled properly the whole time.
Okay. And you guys, so there was three of you, right?
Yeah, so it was myself and a co-driver. I did about 60% of the driving, he did 40, and then we had a third person in the back. And both of those guys actually ended up being part of our founding team for VINwiki.
Okay. Okay, that's incredible. So so you made 3 stops, I think? How many stops did you make along the way?
So we knew kind of the mark to beat was 6 fuel stops, and I wanted to cut that in half with the ability to carry more fuel. And so we did it in 3 stops, and we had 2 additional stops to add some oil. The car burned a lot more oil than I'd ever imagined it would.
Okay. Did you switch drivers? Is that when you switched also on the stops?
We learned that it was actually a little bit better to switch a little bit more often. So we would stop about every 200 to 300 miles for a 1-minute kind of relief and roadside driver change on the side of the road.
Okay. So you were going on average 100 miles an hour.
And when you say on average 100 miles an hour, generally when you look back at a trip like this, your average speed will be about 30 miles per hour slower than what you feel like you're cruising at. So most of the time we were driving 130 to 145 miles an hour.
130. And that's just amazing. How is it that you could go across the entire country at 130 miles an hour and no one stops you? Like no one, I mean, that's just, I can't imagine that.
Well, obviously we had as many gadgets and high-powered binoculars and everything else that we could use to kind of minimize the risk of happening upon a police officer in such a circumstance, but we only passed 5 fixed speed traps, and we saw them all well in advance except for one in Ohio. My co-driver was driving at that point, and I saw him up in the median. I said, you know, brakes, brakes, brakes. He's like, oh, I see the brakes up there. I said, no, there's a cop. And he's going about 135 and just stands on the brakes as we go right on by this cop. And it was just kind of everybody's freaking out. But as I look, he's just sitting there in the median in the middle of the night typing on his computer. But we ended up averaging 108 across the whole state of Ohio, 110 across all of Indiana, and I was averaging 117 across Illinois until we had to stop because the car was begging for extra oil.
Wow. Wow. So that the Midwest was kind of your bread and butter in terms of really.
It was, and those are kind of the most notorious states for speeding, where you don't expect to have any shot at making good time, but it worked remarkably well.
Right. And how about coming? You know, where was the slowest spot? So coming out of New York City, I would imagine it would have been,
it is,
depending on what time of day.
Yeah, trying to get out of the city is a formidable thing, and so it took us 12 minutes to get through the Lincoln Tunnel, which in the other runs that I've done in these old car runs or cheap car runs or just kind of tribute drives, we've never been able to do it that quickly again. But it's amazing, just how those couple miles really do handicap you. And for me, it was really important to pay as much homage to the history of the event. And they generally started from the Red Ball, and they generally finished at the Portofino in the times that they ran it competitively. Now, the record that I had to beat was actually started at the New York Classic Car Club, and it finished at the Santa Monica Pier, which is only a difference of about 3 or 4 miles, but those are the slowest miles of the trip. And so even by Alex's own concession, that was probably a 30-minute advantage that he had in doing that. We were coming through St. Louis, and we saw that the GPS's estimated time was right where we needed to be to set the record. And the GPS is assuming that we're going to drive the speed limit. So we had gone so fast in that first leg that we knew that we were well on track to do it.